Okay, so we've got some start code here for this color brightness calculator, and basically I can type in different colors into here, and it'll give me a little preview of that RGB color, and then calculates the brightness. And also what it does is, based on the brightness, the text color will be black or white. So if the brightness is above, I think it was 160 I did. So let's make this 0. The brightness is now 108, and you'll see the text color is white. Okay, so this program is working for one color. My goal is to make it more efficient and organized using functions, and to add multiple colors. So we're going to see lots of opportunities for functions to improve this code. So again, here's the start code. We've got our HTML variables to just store all the different elements we need, the input elements. The bright element is this right here, span, and then this is the preview element right here, and then the inputs, of course. Okay, so those are the HTML variables that are storing those elements, and that's why I end it with an EL to stand for element, to remind me that this variable is an actual HTML element. Okay, when I click the button, I get the input values. I do some testing of the input values because the colors must be between 0 and 255. So if I try to do like a -20, it'll say, no, that's not allowed, and it just turns it to 0. If I try to go 300, it says, no, that's not allowed. It changes it to 255. Okay, so I do that with the R value, the G value, and the B value. And hopefully you're seeing, well, hold on, that's repetitive. We need a function for that. And absolutely, let's do that. Okay, then we calculate and output the brightness. Again, there's some complexity here in terms of calculating. We could abstract that and put that into a function. And then there's this updating the RGB preview, which also could be done into a function. It's not repetitive, but again, functions aren't just used to help make code more efficient. It also makes it more organized. And the idea is like this button click function is kind of like the big boss, and it's going to tell, other functions to do their jobs to help it, right? So that this function doesn't have to do everything. It'll ask other functions to do smaller jobs. Okay, so we break up our program into those logical chunks. So let's start with this stuff here. And we could do this a bunch of different ways. I'm going to suggest that we're going to use a function called constrain. Constrain means to constrain a value between a low and a high, right? To make sure that it's between that low and that high. All right, let's do that down here. I'll have a section for helper functions. Sorry. And actually, this might be a good time to show you this as well, is that we could actually make another file. Let's do helpers.js. And this is where we could define our helper functions inside of this file. Function constrain. And then, yeah, this is fine. And then in here, we just have to make sure that when we load our JavaScript, before we load our main, we want to load that helpers.js. And I don't have to do a defer here, because in helpers, we're just going to define functions, and that can happen right away. Here we need to do a defer because we're searching for HTML elements, and we need to wait for the page to load before we can find those elements. Okay, so in here, we're going to do this constrain function. Basically, it constrain a value between a low and high limit. So we're going to take in a value and a low and a high limit. And the code, I'm actually going to copy and paste from here because it's very similar to this. So copy and paste. But we don't have these we got to use our parameters, right? Because these are going to store the value. So if the value is less than whatever my low is, then what I want to do is, I'm not going to do all of this stuff. I'm just going to return the low value, right? Because my value is below the low limit. So I'm like, no, you can't go below the low limit. So I'm going to return the low limit. And then if my value, caps lock, sorry. If my value is greater than the high limit, then I want to return the high limit. Okay, and that should, okay, and then the final else is if the value is within the limits, then we would just return the value, right? So we could take in this value, this number that we want to constrain, we set the limits, and it'll guarantee return something between low and high. right? If I'm too low, it'll return low. If I'm too high, it'll return high, else the value is fine, and we can just return the value. Okay, so that should work. I better save this too before I forget. Save, good. And now how can I use it here? Well, I'm going to say R is going to be assigned constrain. I'm going to pass in R, right, which is the value that I want to constrain is the R value. And I want to make sure that's between 0 and 255. So if it's less than 0, it'll return 0. If it's greater than 255, it'll return 255. And if it's in between, it'll return whatever it was. And then we reassign that back into R. Okay, so it's constraining that R value and saving the constrained value back into R. And then the only thing I need to do here is change this to R. We still need this line of code. This is just saying, hey, that input element, let's make sure we update the value of that input element to be the new constrained value, right? So that it doesn't, well, let me show you what would happen if we don't have this. So yeah, this is good. Make sure it works. If you go like this, you'll see that this stayed as 0, but this didn't turn to 0. If I make this 350, that's 255, but it just didn't update the input element to reflect the constrained value of that thing. Okay, so we got to make sure we do this to update that value. Okay, and then we can just do the same thing. G is assigned constrain G0255. G input element dot value is assigned G. B is assigned constrain B0255. And the B input element, the value of it, is assigned B. And that code is a lot simpler than doing this big else if stuff all the time. Okay, cool. So validate those input values. All right, let's see where else we can do. Oh yeah, we talked about doing this this calculation. This is very natural, right? You're doing a formula and it takes an inputs, RGB, and it returns the result, brightness. So let's have a function here, function calc brightness that takes in RGB. We'll just say here, calculate the brightness of an RGB color. And I want to return the result of the calculation. Bam, right here. Okay, math.square root, and we can actually throw in, I don't want brightness to be, like RGB values are not really decimals usually, so we can throw in the math.round right inside of here. I did that on 2 separate lines of code here just to make it look a little neater, but now I think we don't need that as much, and I just call the function now, and I pass in RGB. Right? RGB are these values that I got from here, and I pass them into the function. They get stored into these RGB parameters. It does the calculation and returns the result. Ta-da! Hopefully that still works. And then we output the result here. Yeah. So let's change this to 180, and looks good. Okay, awesome. Okay, so yeah, it's a very common formula type thing, right? You pass in the arguments and it returns. And it doesn't really make it that much more efficient, but it hides all this complexity, right? All this complex formula. I can write this code once and I can use my calc brightness function as many times as I want. Okay, and then this stuff here too, I think I might just for organization's sake, one function shouldn't do that much work. This is like the big boss function, and it's like, dude, you're doing way too much work. You got to delegate, right? So we're going to take this code here and also put this inside of another function. What does this code need? It needs the RGB values, and it also needs the preview element and the brightness. Okay, that's cool. All right, so let's write that. So I'm going to write a function called update color, and it's going to need RGB. It's going to need the preview element, and it's going to need a brightness. And I'm just going to take all of this code here. I'm going to cut it, Control X and Control V, So I'm going to use RGB to build the string. My preview element is going to be assigned that string, right, the inner HTML, so it appears on the screen. I'm going to set the background color to be that RGB string as well. And then if the brightness is that, then I set the color of the preview element to black, otherwise to white. Okay, and we're going to rename some things in here because we're going to add multiple colors. So we'll call this R1, G1, B1, Bright 1, Preview 1. And maybe I should have done this R1, R in 1, G in 1 element, B in 1 element, just to keep it consistent. R in 1, G in 1, B in 1, and then these input values will be R1, G1, and B1. And then R1, R1, fun, R1. Oh dear. And this is because I want to do multiple colors, right? So I'm going to need to have, I'm going to make a mistake somewhere and forget something. Well, we'll see. Brightness 1, R1, G1, B1, brightness 1, bright 1 element. I did that right? Yep. Okay, cool. And now I'm going to call that function update color, which takes in R1, G1, B1. It takes in preview 1 element and brightness 1. Save. Ooh, I really hope that works. Save. So RGB, preview, brightness. All right, let's make sure that works. Let's just set this to like 180. Oops, 180. Oh, just helpers.js line 24. We've got a little, oh, when I hit Control Save, I probably messed up. Whoops, all right. Okay. 255, -20, and 80. All right, looks good. Okay, cool. Yeah, and if we make this higher, the text should turn black because it's brighter. All right, awesome. Okay, now why did I do that? Because my goal was to be able to add some more colors, right? We've got this paragraph here with the RGB and all that good stuff. We could add more colors here, and then there'll be some repetition, of course, which we can hopefully solve using functions. But I'm running out of time here, so I think we'll do that in another video. So we'll see you in the next video, and we'll finish this off.